All right, it's time for us to go ahead and get started. We'll have some slides up in just a minute to help illustrate the lesson. But I hope that you have enjoyed the study of Genesis as much as I've enjoyed putting it all together. I've got a grasp of things that I had never really had, and so it's really great to be in here, and I think we're going to be able to finish it. I've got it laid out in such a way that I think that we will be able to finish it. I want us to begin by looking at Jacob's children. We looked at this, but look in Genesis chapter 30. Got your Bibles open? Look in Genesis chapter 30, and you've got the entirety, almost the entirety of this chapter. And when you go to, I believe it's chapter 36, when you got over to chapter 36, you've got an entire chapter devoted to Esau. Genealogy is important in Bible history. And it became overly important to the Jews. Paul told Timothy to avoid endless genealogies. You know what that means? You ever try to trace your family tree on using Ancestry or some program like that? It's endless, isn't it? You're shaking your head. Yes, those of you who have done it, you know. It is amazing. I love the folks in Marion County, Alabama. I am just, it's a culture that is different from about any other part. The 2 or 3 little counties over there in the western part of the state, they are just different. And people who live there are different. And we even have an elder, a tall, slim elder from that part of the country, and people are different from over there. But especially in Marion County, they teach their children the genealogy. It is unbelievable. I mean, it's amazing. And they'll say, well, now he married so-and-so's daughter, and he's really their third cousin. And then they will go back and they'll say, because his great-great-grandmother's sister married so-and-so, and here are the little kids in the room, and they're supposed to memorize all of this genealogy. If you ever get up in that, just get out the country. Don't go to the city. The city folks are just like city folks down here. But that is an amazing thing. But they're important. Why are they important? The fact that Matthew chapter 1 could say Jesus, the son of David, the son of Abraham. That's one of the 332 prophecies. In fact, that's 2 of the 332 prophecies about the coming of the Messiah. And so whenever you get over here to the matter of Jacob's children, Jacob had the 2 wives. And if you look at the screen, the first 4 children were children that belonged to Leah. Leah was the legitimate wife, the first wife of Jacob. Somebody asked me last week, well, why do they have all these multiple wives and having children by all these multiple women? You've got to understand, you're looking at the New Testament and you're looking all the way back to the Old Testament, and you're taking New Testament morality principles and applying them over there. I'm not saying that it was right. Genesis chapter 2 and 3 says, the 2 shall become one flesh. Not the 3, not the 4 or 5, but the 2 shall become one flesh. And you need to understand that. But it's very easy for us to say, well, I just can't understand why they did this. Well, I can, because it was the fact that we're taking principles that we have grown up with, we've known all of our lives, and applied it. And so Jacob is over there, and he gets Leah. Leah's first 4 children. First 4 children that Jacob has are by his wife. Now then, there's Rachel. The Lord has shut up the womb of Rachel. She cannot have children. And if you will look at the names that she gives to her children, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, if you look at the meaning of those names, and it's in the text, and we're not going to do that right now because we'll get bogged down, but every one of those texts says, he will now love me. Now I'm getting in a better shape. I mean, there's a progression of ideas. Not every one of them is progressive like that, but she's really happy. And then the fact she gives those children those names, sometimes it's almost in your face. I mean, she names them the child, and the message is, that is in your face. For example, whenever barren Rachel, wanting to have children, does what Sarah did for Abraham, and that is, have a child by my handmaiden. And so she gives her handmaiden so she can have children. Somebody said, that's unheard of. What about surrogate mothers in our culture? A lot of folks readily accept that, don't have any problem in it. When they get to the Bible, that's almost what you've got. She's representative, giving these children. So now, these children will almost belong to Jacob. They don't belong to Leah in any sense. They belong to me. And so Rachel has these children by Bilhah. Well, what happens is Leah then sees what's happened. And Leah is not able to have children at this point in her life. And so she does the same thing. And so now Jacob has 4 plus 2 plus 2. I think that's 8 children that he has these 8 children. And then Leah then gives birth to 2 other sons and to a daughter. The text will mention, and we may point out that verse as we read it, his daughters, plural, are mentioned. And so we know the names of 13 of these children. Those last 2 children were Issachar, Zebulun, and Dinah. At this point, Rachel has the next child. Next slide, it shows Rachel having children. Rachel has a son named Joseph. Rachel has a son named Joseph. And so now, Rachel has a son. What am I saying wrong? Somebody's shaking their head no and everything. Huh? You're saying Joseph. Rachel has a son, and names that son Jacob. Okay, I've got it now. Okay. No, Rachel has a son named Joseph. Okay, I've got Jacob on the screen. That's why people are shaking their head, okay? And I looked at my notes and I thought, how have I got Jacob down here? Jacob's the father of these children. And so has a son named Joseph. Now then, she later has a son named Benjamin, but not during this time when we're having these 11 children. There were 11 teenage boys in Jacob's house at one time. And so the age difference between Reuben and Joseph, it's 11 children different. Now then, he has all of these children because he bought Leah as a wife. He didn't know that's what he was getting. And so he gets, that's 7 years, and he works 7 more years. And that's whenever he gets Rachel, and he buys her on credit. And so there are 14 years of his life. So in 14 years, almost all of Jacob's children are born. Now, he stays another 6 yenow, and there are no children born during this other 6 years. And so but now we got to get Benjamin to be born, but Benjamin is born after Jacob comes back toward Palestine. Let's go to the next aspect, and that is Jacob and Laban. This is this 6-year period of his life. And I know we talked about this last week, but felt like I didn't do a good job talking about Jacob's age and everything in relationship to this. But, Jacob is, he's not a young man whenever he flees to get away, when he flees to get away. So Jacob, going back to Jacob, when he arrives over there, and that is with Leah and Rachel, when he arrives over there, he meets Laban. He works 14 years to get the wives. And now an agreement is made between Jacob and Laban that involves the next 6 years of his life. So we got 14 years plus 6 years. That's the 20 years he was away from home. You remember what Rebekah said to Jacob whenever when Esau was threatening Jacob's life? You remember what Rebekah said to him? Go live with my brother for a few days. You ever have one of those few day periods in your life where you thought something's going to work out just immediately, and she likely never ever saw him again, and may have known nothing about his life? Because when Jacob comes back, Esau does not know what's happened in Jacob's life. And so here's a mother who says, you go over there with my brother, and Isaac sits down and says, and while you're over there, find you a wife. And so that's why he gets over there. He finds Rachel and Leah, and that's why he has those wives once he gets over there. But now, to earn his wages, he works another 6 years. The Bible says that during that 6 years period, while he is there working, that he becomes more wealthy than Laban does. We talked last week, you remember about him stripping the bark off of those trees and putting those tree limbs inside the watering troughs whenever the strong and healthy lambs or sheep and goats came to drink out of that trough. He did the same thing in relationship to the cattle, because all of those that were not pure white sheep, all of them became Jacob's sheep. And of all of those goats that were striped and everything, multicolored, they became Jacob's goats and everything. Same thing about cattle. And so whenever the sheep are not as healthy as they look like, and I read this, and I don't know this from experience at all. I think my experience in New Zealand was different from this. But normally, one thing I read, they have babies twice a year, and the springtime baby sheep, I'm talking about biblical sheep, are more healthy than the others. And so, if the sheep or the goats didn't look healthy, he took those strips, those limbs out of that watering trough. And I know you got questions about that. I've got an answer for it if you want to ask it. I don't know. I know it happens. And I know all of a sudden that all of the weak sheep and weak goats and weak cows became Laban's. And Joseph moved 3 days away from where Laban was, and he had his animals just kept growing and growing and growing, and his herds and flocks became so much greater. He became more wealthy than Laban. So Jacob is ready to leave. And so he departs at night after he works 6 more years, and he's going home. He does not know what awaits him when he gets back home. What happened the last time he was there? His brother. You know what his brother's got? His brother has got an AK-47 that he used for his hunting. And so he's headed back home, and his brother's a hunter, isn't he? I mean, he's a mighty man. Who's Jacob? Well, he's not the mighty hunter. You know, he's almost his mama's pet, Esau is his daddy's pet, favorite child. And so you've got this, and he's going back home, and he's fearful of his brother. Well, when Laban hears that he has departed, Laban chases him down. Now he's 3 days away, so he could leave at night and make some distance. And so whenever he leaves, Laban chases him down, and Laban makes peace with Jacob, saying, "Why did you do this?" Now the reality is, Rachel stole some of the gods, some sort of icons, some sort of idols that Laban had. And he is somewhat concerned, and maybe more concerned, about these little images of his gods. You call them good luck charms, but they're probably a whole lot more than just a rabbit's foot, you understand. They were icons that were part of his blessing. And he says, and so Jacob says, just search around and try to find them. You remember Jacob's a trickster? Wonder what Rachel is like. She's somewhat of a trickster too. And so she hides these icons in her tent, and then she sits down on top of them, and whenever he comes in, she says, I don't feel like getting up. She has hidden the icons in her baggage, in her luggage there. And so now she tricks her own father. And now he heads to that time whenever he is going to meet Esau. Look in chapter 31, and let me just look at the text. Where Esau comes to meet Jacob. It's in chapter 32, Chapter 32. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of the Lord met him. And when Jacob saw them, he says, "This is God's camp." That's interesting. Jacob is traveling, and he sees the angels going with him. And he gives that name a place that signifies the events that happened. So he sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. Where's Esau live? Where do the Edomites live? They don't live in the promised land. Look at the promised land, think of a Bible map, think of the Dead Sea. And then go on the right side of your map to the east bank of the Dead Sea, and that's where Esau lived. Now the promised land had to do with the Jordan River all the way over to the Mediterranean Sea, all the way up to the Euphrates, all the way down to the river of Egypt. And that's not where Esau is. He's left. He's over in Seir. So Jacob, knowing where he is, says, speak, and he sends the messengers, and he commanded them, saying, "Speak thus to my lord Esau." Isn't that amazing? Are you with me? I'm reading in chapter 32, verse 4. To my lord Esau. You see the word Lord? You see anything unusual about the way the word Lord is spelled in that passage? Like the rest of the Bible? It's not caps. It's not all caps. This is not the name for Jehovah. Whenever it's in all capital letters, that's the Hebrew word for Jehovah. You go speak to my master. You go speak to this honorable individual. Go speak to my lord Esau. Thus your servant Jacob says, I have dwelt with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen and donkeys and flocks and male and female servants, and I've sent them to tell my Lord that I may find favor in your sight. The messenger returned to Jacob. We came to brother Esau, and he also is coming to meet you with 400 servants. There's an army of 400 men who are with him, who leave down from the east side of the Dead Sea, and they're headed up toward the Euphrates River, up in that part of the Promised Land, up in that direction. And so Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. You see, he has got not only an AK-47, They've got troop carriers. I mean, they've got bazooka guns. They've got drones that they can use and everything. I hope you understand I'm speaking facetiously, but that's exactly the emotions Jacob has. He's coming to kill me. I tricked him. I have taken from him the birthright and the blessing. The birthright had to do with the possessions, the right of birth. And so the oldest son got a double portion, and he stole that. And so he bought that. You remember, Esau came in and was hungry, and so for a pot of beans that evidently were red beans, I think they're pinto beans, and for a pot of beans, he sells his birthright. He's that hungry. And then you remember the deception that that Jacob and Rebekah played on blind Isaac? That's when he got the blessing. He's terribly afraid. And he says in verse 8, he said, if Esau comes to one company and attacks them, the other company may be left. What did he do? Well, he separated his people who have come with him into two groups. And he look in verse, and so he separates them into two groups. And then Jacob said, O God of my fathers, Abraham, Isaac, of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, the Lord. You see the word Lord? See how it's spelled? You've got to be able to train your mind. Every time you see the word Lord, that is the word Jehovah. It is the Hebrew word Jehovah when it's in all caps like that. And the Jews would not translate the word Jehovah, never put any vowels with it to translate it. So whenever the Hebrews were reading the Bible, they would come to this word Jehovah. They would not, lest they take the name of the Lord their God in vain, the name was too holy, they put no vowel sounds with it. How would you pronounce J-H-W-A or V-H or, Y-H-W-H, Yahweh? You cannot pronounce J-H-W-H. Why? No vowel sounds. You cannot even make the sounds, because for you to hear what I'm saying, I've got to activate my vocal cords, and that's what vowels do. And so when they were reading the text and they came to this, they would say the word Elohim. Elohim. And you may see in some writings where people today put the word God, G-D. Ever seen any of that in your readings? You ever see that? That's doing in English what they did in Hebrew, which is not what God intended. You understand? I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying the name Jehovah, because they're holy and righteous men what Abraham named that place where Isaac was offered, Jehovah-Jireh, and it's translated that way in the King James. So you could say it, but they were hypocritical, so they just said, we're not going to say that holy name of God. And sometimes if you read some of the televangelists, if you'll look at them, they'll put the words on the screen, and they will have G-D. They won't put an O sound in there. They misunderstand what this is all about. But here it is, and so he says Jehovah. And so he says, if you're reading the Hebrew text, it would say, O God, not Jehovah God, or the other word for God, another word for God, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, and the Jehovah who said to me, return to your country and to your family, and I will deal with you. I am not worthy of the least of all of your mercies and all the truths which you have shown to your servant. For I have crossed over this Jordan with my staff, and now I've come in two companies. And so deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau. He's scared to death. You ever had that in your life? I mean, I just don't know which way to turn. I absolutely do not know what to do. And so he turns to God and he said, God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, you told me to return. And based on the way you dealt with Abraham, the way you dealt with Isaac, and the very fact that you told me this is what I ought to do, I have come to this point and I'm scared to death. Isn't that us? Adversity comes in our lives, and we just don't know which way. We just absolutely don't know what to do. Well, what you do, you think about, how's my God going to handle this? And so he says, deliver me from the hand of Esau. For you said, verse 12, I will surely treat you well and make your descendants as the sands of the sea, which can not be numbered for the multitude of them. And he's got an army of 400, cut down 400, and every descendant that I have, it's going to be like the sands of the sea. He's coming down here to wipe us out. God, you made this promise. You've made this promise. When Abraham is ready to offer Isaac, the book of Hebrews said, he staggered not. Romans says he staggered not at the promise of God through unbelief. The book of Hebrews says he ascended that mountain knowing that some way God would work it out, because God had said in Isaac, your descendants. And if I kill Isaac, some way, somehow, God, if I go ahead and do what God can, if I kill Isaac, that's not going to frustrate God. Why? God, who cannot lie, said, it's coming through Isaac. And this is the very prayer Jacob prays. And so Jacob prays this prayer that says, Lord, deliver me because you promised. So he dwelt there that night. Let's see, verse 13. So he lodged there that same night and took what came to his hand as a present for Esau his brethren. Now look what he sends. This is no small atonement gift. This is more than a box of chocolates. He says, 200 female goats and 20 male goats. How healthy are these? The finest goats of Mesopotamia, where he'd been living with Laban. 200 ewes and 20 rams. 30 milk cows with their colts. It's interesting, the translation. 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 foals. He delivered them to the hands of his servant, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, take these to Esau. And so now then, here these gifts coming to Esau. And so, he gets a gift, and a few hours later he gets another gift, and a few hours later he gets another gift, and a few hours later he gets another gift. And they said, when Esau, verse 17, when Esau my brother meets you and asks him, to whom do you belong, and where are you going? What are these animals that are in front of you? Then you shall say them, they are from your servant Jacob. It is a present sent to my lord Esau, and behold, he's coming. So he commanded the second and the third and all who followed and drove, saying, in this manner you speak to Esau, behold, your servant Jacob is behind us. I'm trying to pave the way for being there. I've got a heading break in my Bible before verse 22. I don't know if your Bible has. One of the real things I love about the King James Bible is, time out, I want to tell you what happened next. And that's when Jacob wrestles with the angels. And so you will see about this. And we will come back to this. Let's go to the next chapter where they meet. Chapter 33. Now Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and Esau was coming. With him were 400 men. He divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maidservants, and he put his maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children behind, and Rachel and Joseph last. And he crossed over before them, saying, and bowed down himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother Esau. Esau runs to meet him. You want to become Jacob? Here's your brother, 400 men behind him, and here he comes running at you. And he fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And he lifted his eyes and saw the women and the children. Whose are these with you? So he said, the children whom the Lord has graciously given your servants. I crossed over the Jordan when I went to Laban. What possessions did I have? A staff. And now he comes back a really, really wealthy man. You got to understand, when you start talking about sending, all these sheep and these goats and these cattle and everything, he's a wealthy man. And Esau says, I don't need those. And Jacob says, no, you're going to take them. You're going to keep them. And so peace is made between Jacob and Esau. And so Esau says, Jacob, let me leave some men here with you to protect you. And he says, I don't need it. He'd been under the protection of God. I don't need them. And so he says, you go ahead, and I will come to meet you. We cannot travel, these women and children, and we'll have to go at a cattle's pace. Your army can travel a whole lot faster than I can come with all of these possessions. So Esau returns down to Seir, that area that's on the east side of the Dead Sea. Got that? Now where's Jacob head? Heads back to the Promised Land. You remember when he was at Bethel before? That's where he saw that dream, and he named that place Bethel. Guess where he's headed? There's a pile of rocks he built there 20 years ago. There's a monument that he placed there 20 years ago. And he promised God, if you bring me back to this land, I'll give you 10% of everything I own. I hope there are piles of rocks in your life. Does that make sense? Think about Hannah and her pile of rocks. Prayed that she might have a son. What'd God give her? A son. And whenever that son was born, she says, I'm going to give him back to God. God has lent me this son. And as long as he lives, I'm going to give him back to you. I hope that you, when your children were born, you made a promise to God. God, be my helper. Pile of rocks. Can't see them. But every time Hannah saw Samuel raised, remember, by the old man Eli down there at the tabernacle, every time she saw him once a year, carried him a coat every year, pile of rocks. God heard me and God was with me. I hope you've got a pile of rocks in your marriage. I hope the vows that you made are not renewed just on your 25th anniversary. They ought to be renewed over and over and over and over again. I am committed to you. I'm committed. Pile of rocks. When you obeyed the gospel, did you put a pile of rocks there? God be with me. And I promise you that I'll do the very best I can as long as I can. Sometimes our pile of rocks get knocked over, don't they? That's where he's headed back to. And that's where you need to head. When you made promises to God in your life about your spiritual life, go back and stand with that pile of rocks. That's where he's headed. It's rather interesting. There's no indication of Jacob ever going down Seir to meet him. That doesn't mean he did not. Jacob and Esau head this way. You look over in chapter 36, look at chapter 36, and in chapter 36, what do you have? I've got a heading for chapter 6. You got headings in your Bible? Look at all of the things in those 43 verses in chapter 36. That's Esau. Forget about Esau. We're going to focus on Jacob. We're going to focus on Joseph. We're going to focus on the children of Jacob, the children of Israel. And so they part their ways until Isaac dies. Isn't it funny how funerals bring you back together again? I find that absolutely remarkable. But in our culture, you know, that's what brings families together. You think of how many times you've gone, you've traveled great distances to be someplace, and that's what happens. That's what Isaac. Now then, there's no indication that Jacob went and talked to Isaac. There's no indication he did not. If you're Jacob, what are you going to do? Wouldn't you love to have heard the conversation between Isaac and Jacob? We don't know. And I love that about the Bible. Guys, if you just read it slow enough and not just try to rush through and listen to it, you've got to stop and relive and live all of these things with all the emotions. And all of a sudden, your emotional response through them to what God was doing for them builds faith in your heart for what God will do for you. You just stood a few minutes ago at Jacob's pile of rocks at Bethel. You were just there in your mind. And if you were listening, with your soul, what happened was you stood there with Jacob and you had emotions very similar to what Jacob had. God kept his promise, and now all of a sudden you think, that's my God. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob is Dan's God. You put your name in that verse. He hasn't changed. And what he did for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, in spite of all the mistakes they ever made in their lives and all the blunders they ever made in their lives, he was still the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And put your name, and he is my God. Read it slow enough to have this time when Jacob is terrified about the future. What do? You look at the nature of God and the promise of God and said, the way God dwelt, and hopefully we'll get to Joseph. We may not, I'm going so slow today, but I'm telling you folks, this book's got to come alive. It's not just reading Bible stories. It's God and people. When we eat the supper in a few minutes, You stand at the foot of the cross. You have the emotions that Peter might have had if he was standing way off in the outback. Have his emotions at the foot of the cross. You stand at the foot of the cross. Those people who 2 months later were going to hear the statements, "You killed the Son of God." And they said, "We killed his son. What shall we do?" You become Mary, the mother of Jesus. And then you stand there and you look up at that Savior on the cross. God, you forgave those men. Father, forgive them. The thief, God, be with me and I'll do better. Folks, this is a divine book revealing the Creator of the world and his desire to have a relationship to you. And you remove that Creator of the world out of your life in spite of all of the evidence. 332 predictions made about the Messiah, and Jesus fulfilled them, every one. You remove the evidence that the heavens declare the glory of God. You think it all happened by accident? You remove that from your life, and you know nothing. You're on your own trying to figure out what to do and how to deal with adversity and how to deal with death. You've closed your eyes to that light that shines down from heaven, and this is where you are trying to figure out what's happening in this world. Stand at Jacob's monument. This is the house of God. And so he wrestles with that angel. I'm sorry, I've just quit even looking at the slides. He sends the gifts to Jacob the night before he wrestles with the angels. There's the reconciliation with Esau. And then the interesting thing is, after that reconciliation with Esau, Jacob removes all of the idols. That interesting? Those little icons that Rachel was holding on to, I don't need them. I don't need the horoscope to tell me. Because I happen to be born in a particular month or something like that, I don't need, mind readers. I don't read palm readers. You hear about the guy that was trying to decide whether to go to a mind reader or to a palm reader. And his best friend says, "Go to the palm reader, you've got a hand." Think that one through. That's it, folks. Thank you very, very much for this. I'm sorry we didn't get a little bit farther, but I wanted this to come alive. And I went through it so fast. So we've just lost an entire week in covering the book, okay? But I hope it's profitable for us.